I will fight anyone who says they don't like Alina and Mal. Hey everyone, it's Jananie and welcome back to my channel, The Story Ain't Over. So today I am coming to you with a review slash book talk of one of my all-time favorite series in the world, one that I recently reread in preparation for a new release, and that series is the one and only Shadow and Bone Trilogy by Leigh Bardugo. So the first book is Shadow and Bone, the second book is Siege and Storm, and the third book is Ruin and Rising. I read these books back in 2015 and these were honestly my favorite things in the world. I love them so much, and so I reread them again recently. I just finished this at 2 a.m. last night before I'm filming this, and I reread them for the release of King of Scars, and so I wanted to do a kind of video on them, on how much I love them and the things I love about them, but also just kind of tell you how my thoughts kind of changed on this second reread. So this is gonna be like a non-spoilery section at the beginning, and then I will do the full book talk of the whole series and kind of go into depth for each book after that. So in terms of non-spoilery thoughts, so for those of you who don't know what the Shadow and Bone trilogy is about, so the series basically follows our main character Alina Starkov, who is this orphan who lives in this Russia-inspired nation called Ravka, and Alina is a cartographer in the military, and her best friend from the orphanage that she grew up in, Mal, is also a soldier in the First Army, the regular human army, and he is a tracker in the army. And in this world there are people called the Grisha. So the Grisha are basically people with magical powers. There's kind of different kinds of orders or like types of Grisha. So there are the Grisha who are like healers and like people who can control kind of bodies and like blood and hearts. And then there are also the summoners who can summon like wind and water and fire. And then there are also the fabricators, who are basically kind of like the sciencey nerds of the Grishas, and so they can do kind of different things with matter and physical objects and chemical properties and that kind of thing. And so in this world there are the Grisha, and in Ravka they are led by this man named the Darkling, who is one of the most powerful Grisha, and he can control darkness. And so you might have heard about the Darkling. He's a very popular character. And in Ravka there's like this issue of the Unsea, which is basically called the Shadow Fold, and it's this stretch of land that is basically darkness. And one of the previous Darklings hundreds of years ago, called the Black Heretic, created this stretch of land full of darkness by accident, and so since then Ravka has kind of been divided on the east and west side, and they haven't been able to get really to their ports very well, and so everyone's been trying to kind of find a way to get rid of the fold. And because of the immense darkness there are like creatures that lurk there, and so it's really hard to cross. And so Alina and Mal at the beginning of the first book are preparing to cross the fold, and that is when Alina finds out that she has magical powers. She is the sun summoner, who is like someone that they've been waiting for, someone who can summon sunlight, and basically the only person who can combat the darkness of the fold. And so the series kind of tumbles from there as Alina kind of discovers her destiny and like the things that she needs to do, and it very much is kind of this chosen one story, but there are so many merits to this story, and it's just such a wonderful and amazing journey. One of the things that I feel like people don't realize after only reading the first book is that they don't get to see the full arc of all the characters, of Alina, of Mal, of some of the other characters. They don't get to see like the growth and change, and even in Leigh Bardugo's writing, I do feel like her writing in the first book isn't as amazing as it is by the third book. But aside from that, this series is just really well done in the sense of the world building and the character development. I do feel like the first one does fall a little bit short in terms of the other ones. In my opinion, in the first go around, the first book was kind of like a 3-4 stars. The second book was my favorite and it was a 5-star, and then the third one was also a 5-star, but I didn't like it as much as the second one. But in my second go around, I actually loved the third one way more. There was just so much more development, and all of the characters were just trying so hard to kind of achieve their goals, and it was just so heartwarming and beautiful to read. And also I just think Leigh Bardugo's writing and structure of the story was just so phenomenally done. So I think the third book is absolutely my favorite, but it's just amazing to see how kind of the world expands and how you get to see the different aspects of the magic. And I do feel like one of the amazing things about this series is that it contemplates a lot of different themes, including power and magic and what happens when a woman becomes like the powerful person, the one who everyone's banking on. It also deals with like belonging and what it means to, you know, be a citizen in a nation. There's not much I can say without spoiling this series, especially because the first book has some twists that like I don't want to spoil for you if you haven't read the series. But overall, I just think this is an amazing series that definitely has a lot of amazing qualities to it, and there's so much that you can gain out of reading the series. And if you like fantasy, if you like seeing like a character move from being at a very unsure, weak position, vulnerable position, to learning to grow and come into herself and really become confident in herself, it's a really great series for that. So I absolutely love this series. That's about all I can say without spoiling anything. So please go away now if you have not read the series, but if you have, please stick around while I go in depth a bit for each book and what I loved about each one and all of my thoughts, all of the things, especially during this reread. All right, let's start at the beginning with Shadow and Bone. So this time around was really interesting reading this just because I feel like I didn't like it as much this time around. The first time I kind of went into it without any expectations. I didn't really know, what was going to happen. So I was kind of, just going with the flow. And I do feel like although I didn't give it a 5 stars, I definitely did give it like up to the 4 because I was so blown by the ending of the book. I was so captivated by the Darkling, by, Alina just getting swept up in this world and this new life. And then, it's all kind of shattered when you realize, wow, the Darkling's like evil. I think this time around I wasn't as captivated by him just because like I knew he was lying to her, so like that kind of ruined the experience, I guess, but I still really enjoyed it. One of the things that I discovered while rereading this is that I completely forgot how funny Alina is, how funny she is, how funny Mal is. All the characters are actually absolutely hilarious. They have some really great one-liners and banter. Like I love the banter that Lee Berdugo writes for this series. I mean, there's some of that in Six of Crows as well, but I feel like these guys really do have some really funny banter. And there are more points in the Shadow and Bone trilogy where the characters are just having fun as opposed to like, begrudgingly hating each other, but then kind of like having these funny moments in Six of Crows. Another thing that kind of bothered me, but like I understood, was how Alina could be so confident and snarky and hilarious just to everyone else on a regular basis, even at the beginning. But when it came to Mal, she lost all sense of like confidence in herself and the belief that, he might like her or notice her. And, Mal himself is kind of a shit in this book. I do really feel that. And by the end of the series, I do feel like he grows so much. Same with Alina. So in that sense, like I really didn't enjoy Shadow and Bone as much as I did the first time. I think I was seeing a lot more of their flaws in that sense, just because I knew what they were going to end up as. And so seeing them at the beginning was just a really big kind of stark difference. I know the first time around, so one thing that really bothered me about Alina and Mal's relationship, which I still kind of feel, especially at the beginning, is the fact that, in order to stay with him, she gave up a part of herself. She gave up being Grisha. She repressed that part of herself. And I always felt like that was so sad, in the sense that she was repressing a part of herself for someone she loved. Even though she loved Mal and she cared for him and she wanted to stay with him, it was just sad that that came at the cost of her own well-being. Because the way that the Grisha power works is that you are rejuvenated the more you use your power. In the long term, it's better for you. And so Alina is kind of like sickly and weak and unsure of herself for so much of this book because she's not using her power, she's repressing it. And it's only when she kind of lets go of Mal, when she thinks that he's not returning her letters and that he doesn't care about her anymore, and she kind of tries to let go of that love she has for him and that care that she has for him. That's the moment when she's able to get control of her power and start being able to use it. And I thought that that was just so sad and poetic in a sense, just because we know that the first time she actually uses her powers because she's touching Mal and trying to protect him, and also because he's the amplifier. And so that was just so strange and interesting, and it always kind of breaks my heart that she was kind of hurting herself because she loved him so much. But another thing with that is that the reason that she was doing that was because she wanted to belong. And, you could argue that had she gone with those Grisha when they came to test her, she might have felt like she belonged with the Grisha that she met at the, second army with the Darkling and all that. She might have felt like she belonged rather than always feeling out of place with the first army and being the person that no one really wanted to be around. But the interesting thing is that, like, she always says this throughout the series, and Mal always says this throughout the series, that home was always with Mal. She always felt like she belonged with Mal, and it's just such an interesting thing. Like, I can never reconcile that with myself, but yeah, it's just such a really interesting kind of dynamic. So reading just this first book, I can totally understand why people might not like Mal or Alina. She is on the prickly side, but I do feel like she's such a strong character if you stick through with her, and she's so funny and snarky. And I definitely think this series and this book came out during that time when, like, everyone had a lot of fun hating on unlikable female main characters and kind of loathing them for the choices that they made in their romantic relationships rather than kind of trying to understand them as people. Like, Alina is such a strong character, especially by the end of the series, but even in here, like, she starts out very unsure of herself, and I think that is something that is, rather than annoying, much more endearing, because I feel like Alina is very self-aware within this book and the next books, that she's very aware when she's being petty or in a bad mood or not communicating. She knows these things and she's self-aware, and you know, she beats herself up for those things, and in a sense that is so endearing, and I never feel like she's dramatic for no reason. Obviously, another reason why I didn't enjoy this one as much is because Nikolai is not in this one. Nikolai is my favorite character in this series, and he's just amazing, and it was just strange seeing him absent from this, even though I knew he wasn't in this one. It was just kind of strange, and it's just kind of exciting to know that he's gonna come in the next one. Another thing about this book is that, you know, the Darkling, he's so compelling in this one, and he really makes you kind of fall for him, especially makes Alina fall for him. And I remember when I first read this, I totally fell for the trap, and reading it again this time, even if I didn't know the twist, I feel like I was much more skeptical of every kind of interaction that they had, just because he is this kind of powerful man. He's never actually like that nice or sweet to Alina. That's the thing in this book. He's just kind of compelling. He makes her want to be around him and want his attention, right? And that's what's so compelling about him. And so I just thought that was just really interesting. All right, so the second one, Siege and Storm. So the first time I read this series, this was actually my favorite one, mostly because of Nikolai, and I just thought it was a lot of fun. I loved seeing kind of Alina taking charge of the second army, and I just loved the whole aspect while they were on the ships, and kind of the plot twist with finding out that Nikolai is Sturmhond and all of that. Like, that was really exciting. Another reason why I think I like this one more than Ruin and Rising the first time I read the series was because I read Ruin and Rising a little bit later. I read the first two right away, right after each other, and then I waited a few months before I read Ruin and Rising because I had heard some mixed opinions about it. So I kind of forgot aspects of the story, and I forgot some side characters, so I didn't care for them as much. But this time around, like, I cared for them so much that I loved Ruin and Rising much more. So it's interesting to me, I was coming back to this and reading it, and I did see parts of it that I, you know, didn't like as much, but this one was just a lot of fun. We get the introduction of Nikolai, we get the introduction of some of like the new side characters like Tolia and Tamar. I love those two. I loved them the first time around, and they were great the second time around. It was also really interesting seeing how Leigh Bardugo's kind of writing had changed and evolved in this book. Definitely gets better. We also see more of the effects of what is going on between Alina and the Darkling kind of taking its toll around Ravka, and how that town gets destroyed at the end of Shadow and Bone, and how there are so many dead, and how Alina kind of feels guilty for that. But another thing we really get an examination of is how Alina gets into power in this book. She really takes charge, and she really makes the effort to take charge. In the first book, she's kind of shying away from the power, but in this book, at the beginning, she's kind of running away with Mal, and then they get caught by the Darkling. And I think it's from that point when Alina stops kind of running away and starts fighting back. One of the things I remember that annoyed me reading this the first time was the way that Alina and Mal kind of run away at the beginning, and the fact that while they were gone, Alina wasn't using her power. And I felt like it had regressed back to the beginning of Shadow and Bone when, you know, Alina was repressing her power just to be with Mal, and I felt like we were getting that again, and that really kind of bothered me. The idea of her suppressing herself just to be with this guy, basically. But like, there are bigger reasons, you know, she's running from the Darkling and all of that, but I just really didn't like, I just felt really uncomfortable with the idea of her kind of giving up all of her amazingness to have a normal life with this guy. But she knows that it's taking a toll on her to suppress her power, and so when she gets the chance, when Nikolai reveals himself, when he asks her to come to Os Alta and kind of take charge, she wants to do it. She actually asks him to take charge of the second army, because he originally is just like, you know, get married to me, be my queen, be this symbolic thing where we're joining the first and second army kind of thing. But she's like, no, I'm not gonna be a symbol. I'm not gonna just be a figurehead. I'm not just gonna sit pretty. I'm gonna actually do something. I'm gonna lead the second army, and I'm gonna take down the Darkling. And she kind of takes charge, and I loved that like aspect. And it was really interesting because I think I said this in my vlog where I was reading that scene where Nikolai kind of reveals himself, and then Alina, Nikolai, and Mal are having this kind of conversation, and Nikolai's kind of telling them what he plans, and Mal's just like, can you stop proposing, and all of that. It was just so interesting seeing how Alina's kind of navigating all of these powerful men who want something from her. Like, the Darkling wants her power, Nikolai wants kind of her name and what she means to the people, and Mal wants her to be like ordinary, doesn't want her to have to answer to this great destiny, but but she's just trying to navigate all of those things and all of these people's desires. I just love seeing Alina kind of take charge in that way, and especially when she gets to Os Alta, to the little palace, and her interacting with the Grisha. That was so interesting. I loved her implementing the changes that she wanted to see, making them sit together and mingle, getting the fabricators to fight, learn to fight, and the Grisha council. I love that. I absolutely love Zoya. She's annoying in this one, but I loved her in Ruin and Rising, and just seeing all the characters change and evolve, and seeing David more. One thing about, you know, being in the little palace was the degradation of Alina and Mal's relationship. And I think this is another reason why people don't like Mal, is the way that when she becomes, you know, powerful, when she's in this position of power, he can't handle it. He wants her to be the same girl she was when, you know, she was powerless, and he can't find a way to really support her. And I do feel like he does go through a struggle. At the beginning, when she says she wants to go to Os Alta, he's totally against it, but then eventually he warms up to it. He offers to be her captain of the guard even after Nikolai makes that like horrible joke about how he and Alina could get married, and how Mal could be her like secret lover and like the captain of her guard. And despite like everything that kind of Nikolai kind of stirs in the pot and aggravates Mal with, Mal still wants to support her and becomes the captain of her guard and wears that sunburst and does all of that for her and comes to the palace with her. And there's that really beautiful line towards the end where they're confronting each other about like why they came to the palace and why they decided to do this. And she's like, you know, we're doing this to save the world, we're trying to, you know, stop the Darkling, all of that. And he's like, no, that's the reason you're doing this. He's like, no, Alina, you came here for Ravka, for the Firebird, to lead the second army. He tapped the sun over his heart. I came here for you. You're my flag, you're my nation. And I just thought that that was such a beautiful line, but also just really kind of gets to the crux of their relationship. Mal is always following her because he cares for her, but Alina has this bigger destiny of the amplifiers and her power and taking down the Darkling and fighting for her country. But Mal has never really felt that connection with his country because she feels absolutely responsible, but he just wants her to be safe, right? But yeah, just seeing like how their relationship kind of deteriorates and falls apart was just so heartbreaking, just because like Alina doesn't want to see it happen. And then half of the like misunderstandings between them is because of like the Darkling visiting her in like these kind of visions, but then she finds out that they're real, but she doesn't know that and she doesn't want to tell him. And then even when she tells him, he just can't like come to grips with it. And also the way that like he's the amplifier, and so when like they get close and she flinches, right, and he misunderstands it and she doesn't know why she's flinching, that whole thing. So I do feel like that kind of annoyed me a little bit more this time around, but less in the sense of like me being annoyed with Mal and more being annoyed with the situation. And so in that way, like I remember when I first read this book, I was super annoyed with Mal. Like I absolutely hated Mal in this book. But this time around, like I really understood why he was doing everything he was doing. And it's just interesting because a lot of times when we're reading books, especially with YA, I feel like we place unrealistic expectations on our characters, expecting them to be perfect all the time instead of expecting them to grow and change and become better by the end. And so when they come to a weak point, when they are unable to support the people they love, we kind of fault them for that. But we're all human, everyone does that. And so I think it's more important to see how they change and evolve rather than how they are at this one specific moment. I think Alina even realizes that she was holding Mal there and letting him go on these hunting trips and become more distant with her because she found it was easier to be powerful without him. And that's part of the reason why it was so easy for the Darkling to visit her. And that whole aspect of him visiting her is just so creepy and cringy. And I remember being slightly captivated by it when I read it the first time around, like, you know, because I had a thing for the Darkling and I thought he was like, you know, you don't realize how twisted he is. I think being older has like changed that as well, but this time I just saw him as like this creepy old man. I mean, he looks young, but old, coming and visiting her and like being creepy. Like it's just so creepy. And it's so interesting how the way he's visiting her in this book, and she's so terrified by it, but she doesn't know what to do. By the third book, when she kind of learns that trick for herself and she starts visiting the Darkling, it's so interesting how she's kind of using that seduction tactic against him, and it's just so wild. Another thing I really loved was even while they were at the little palace, Nikolai, he was amazing. Seeing him navigate the court and his family and the different people and Vasily and like tricking people, and you know, the way that Alina describes him as like the too clever fox, like that's literally what he is. And one of the things that she can't fathom and like conceive of is the way that he is able to like change demeanors and personalities to suit the situation, the way that he can go from ruthless to caring to kind to charming to hilarious to whatever role needs to be filled, he will do it. And that was one of the really interesting things about rereading this series, was because the first time I read it, I really thought that Nikolai loved Alina in some shape, way, or form. I really thought that there was a viable way that those two could be together, that, you know, she was just choosing the wrong person. I think when I first read the series, I really wanted her to choose Nikolai because I thought he was such a good person. He was just, you know, the perfect ideal person. Like, he's a prince, he's good looking, he's charming, he dresses well, he's so smart too. Just him, you know, creating all these inventions and being such a strategic person, like, that was just so admirable. So the whole time I was just thinking, why would you choose Mal when you could choose Nikolai? But I think the thing that I didn't realize the first time reading it, and which I realized more the second time reading it, is that, you know, Nikolai never really professes his love. He never really says that he cares for her that much. Like, they really are just friends. But it's also the idea that he is only kind of proposing and making these advances because he wants something from her. I think Alina says this in the third book, but Nikolai's one true love was Ravka, and he would give up anything for Ravka, for his nation, for the country that he wanted to lead. And I think that was just so true. Alina would never come before Ravka, and I think that that was just a really important part. He was always just strategizing. Even when he does romantic things for her or whatever, he's always strategizing. His romantic advances were never genuine, and in that way, like, he's not very different from the Darkling. He just wants something from her. Like, it seems uncomfortable to like compare Nikolai to the Darkling because Darkling's totally evil, but Nikolai is similar in that sense. He just wants to use her to solidify his position. Even when he first proposes like marriage to her, he says that it can be a marriage in name only. It was just interesting to see by the third book he kind of changes his tune. He really kind of takes to heart the rumors about how he was a bastard and all of that, and how it really kind of harmed his childhood. And so he tells Alina that he doesn't want those rumors for their kid if they end up getting married, if she ends up becoming his queen. But even then, it's kind of like they have the promise of growing to love each other one day, but they don't really love each other right now. They're just platonic friends. And I think that's one of the things that I loved so much this reread, was seeing how platonic Nikolai and Alina were and loving that so much. I love that. There's not enough like male-female platonic relationships in books, so I was totally here for that. Aside from that, the ending, I completely forgot of this, the way that Vasily kind of screws up and gives away their location and their plans and everything. The showdown in the chapel was really interesting to me because I completely forgot what happened. I remember they got away, but like other than that, and that Alina was kind of broken, but other than that I didn't really remember. And the way that she kind of gives up herself and gives in to the Darkling, embraces his power and the Merzos and the abomination and the horrible magic, and creates those creatures to bring down the chapel. That was just so crazy and compelling, and it was just, you know, she gives up everything to save her friends and everyone around her, and she was just so strong in that moment, and I absolutely loved that. And then they run away, and it was great. And now to the last book, Ruin and Rising. This one I gave full-on 5 stars this time. If I could give it more stars, I would. I just loved it so much this time around, and there were so many aspects of it that I didn't realize the first time that I really saw this time, and I absolutely loved. So this one opens with them underground and Lena being really weak, not being able to summon her power, but seeing them escape from underground, from the apparat, and the plan that they pull together. And there's this line, this really great line, where she asks Mal, like, how did you know I would be able to summon? And he was like, faith. I just believed in you. Like, that's literally straight up what he says. So she basically says, like, how did you know I'd be able to summon? I asked under my breath. He glanced at me and a faint grin touched his lips. Faith. I just love that line just because, like, it totally embodies kind of their relationship in the way that, especially in this book, not really in the first 2 books, but in this book, Mal really takes that turn towards believing in her and believing in her power and being there for her. And that was one of the things that I really loved about this book, and seeing that happen was just so amazing. They go through so much in the first and second book, and I do feel like in the second book their relationship really does break. And seeing them come back in this book and Mal settling for not being with her but being there for her, that was amazing. So eventually they come above ground, and then right before they get caught by the militia and like Nikolai comes in, there's that scene with Alina and Mal by like the pond or something. She sees the mark that he got on his back with like the sun, and then I am become weapon. That broke me. I remember reading that the first time and I was like, oh my gosh. It was just really the sense that like Mal was making amends for what he had done and the way he had acted in the first 2 books. I think that's one of the things that's really uncomfortable about the relationship, is that in the beginning he really does undervalue her, and then when it comes to the end, he's really trying to make amends. And I think that was one of the most endearing things about it, because he really does try and he really does succeed in making those amends, because he does so much for her. And then in the hangar, one of my favorite scenes of the book was the scene where Nikolai finds out about Genya, and then the king wants her like, you know, tried for treason and like killed and everything. Have like the king kind of throwing his accusations at Genya, and Genya just like, you know, rising up and not letting him beat her down, because he's such a horrible person. Used her as an object, raped her. Like, there's no way of dancing around that. He did rape her. And seeing her come up against him, and then seeing her explain what she did with the poison, the way that she infused it in her skin and on her body, so that every time he tried to touch her, he was taking in the poison, like he was bringing it upon himself. There was such poetic justice in that. I remember reading it the first time and then reading it this time as well. It just broke my heart knowing that she had to do this to herself, and it solidified in my mind how strong of a character she was. And it was just such a beautiful moment, and Alina supporting her as well. My favorite part was seeing Nikolai step in, be the bigger man, be a better king than his father was, and really taking his father to task and, you know, exiling him, basically banishing him for what he had done. And he literally tells him like, if you don't leave, then I will try you for rape and for everything that you did. And then of course seeing Genya, you know, strike at the king and tell him that epic line, you know, I am not ruined, I am ruination. And that is the best line in the whole series. I am not ruined, I am ruination. And then I loved, this time around, I completely forgot this part last time, but David kind of comes to comfort her, and then she's like, no, you didn't like look at me until I was something to fix. And then David kind of like gives this beautiful speech. He says like, I know metal. And then he's like, I never understand your jokes or like what you guys are saying, and like I don't understand the social aspects of things, but I know metal. And then he was like, beauty was your armor, fragile stuff I'll show, but what's inside you, that's steel. It's brave and unbreakable, and it doesn't need fixing. And it was such a beautiful line and a beautiful speech. And then they kind of kiss, and then it's really funny because Tamara says like this really fun line where she's like, after that speech, like even I wanted to pounce on him, and I just thought that was so funny. Another aspect of that like scene was that Nikolai is kind of shook by the way that he had to like banish his parents, and he has lost all kind of backing and support, really, especially towards the end. Like he's really kind of asking Alina to come to Alta, like even just lead the second army, not even just marry him. Really get the sense that he's alone. He feels alone, and he doesn't know how to grapple with, you know, leading Ravka against all these enemies and being not even a legitimate heir to the throne, and like all of that struggle for him. And I can't wait to see how that's gonna play out in King of Scars. Another thing that I loved about this book was every time Nikolai was like, I love it when you quote me, because Alina does it like 3 times, and every time he's like, I love it when you quote me. I love it when you quote me. I love it when you quote me. It was hilarious. So funny. Let's talk about when the Darkling attacks the hangar, and then they all have to leave, and then Nikolai gets turned into this creature. I remember the first time I read it, I was like, what the fuck is going on? Like, I was just so confused. I didn't understand what was happening, and I just, like, it bothered me so much that this was happening to Nikolai. And it was really kind of soul crushing, even this time around, just because like he's not around for like the other half of the book until like the very end. There is that real fear that he won't be able to take control of his country, to lead, because Nikolai definitely felt like the solution to all of like Ravka's problems, aside from like getting rid of the Darkling. Like he seems like the solution to all that. So just seeing that taken away even momentarily was just so kind of horrifying, and like kind of kills all your hope. And it was really sad. And just knowing that he was in pain, only Nikolai would get turned into a monster and still retain some of his brain and his cleverness to come to Alina and try to get her to heal him. Like, that was just insane. And then of course they all kind of leave and go to find the Firebird, and that whole kind of expedition was its own journey. And I remember the first time reading it, I was so blown by the reveal, the big reveal that the whole series was building up to, the reveal that Mal was the 3rd amplifier. Like, I did not see it coming, not from a mile away. It was just so interesting because I remember like finding out, and then I was being like, oh my god, because it makes so much sense, especially like the first time on the fold, she's like holding on to him when she summons for the first time, and all of the other like little hints. I remember thinking the first time I read this that the way that Mal kind of comes back to life was kind of a cop-out, and the way that Alina loses her power, I was so confused by that. But this time around, like, I think I forgot the fact that her power fractures out of her and goes into all of these other like soldiers and regular people, Okazatsuya, and they become like sun summoners, and I totally forgot that like a bunch of them become sun summoners. And so I didn't even think of that implication and how they might show up in King of Scars. I'm really excited to see that, how that's going to come into play, and it kind of made sense to me this time around more that she lost her power. And also the way that Mal comes back to life, because I think Alina kind of explains it as like him having two lives, the one that he was born with and then the one that had been made through the amplifier that was passed down to him. But I think that the whole journey back from finding out that Mal was the amplifier was just so heartbreaking, because like Alina and Mal are both coming to this realization that like she's gonna have to kill him to kind of save the day. And it was just so sad, because he's so ready to lay down his life for her, and he's like, you know, you were ready to do it at the end of like Siege and Storm in the chapel, and he's like, why won't you let me do this? Oh my gosh, like I love Alina and Mal, and like this reread convinced me that A, Mal is a stellar guy by the end, B, that they are like literally meant for each other. But another thing that was really interesting about this book, I felt like, was the way that the Darkling kind of shows his weaker, more human side a lot more times. He tells her his name when Baghra dies. He kind of really grieves and mourns for her, and the way that he desires to belong and to have a space. So when Baghra tells like Alina the whole backstory about the Darkling and Baghra being Morozova's daughter and all of that, one of the really interesting things about her story about the Darkling and him growing up was the way that he knew that Grisha were hunted in other places, and even in Ravka, they didn't have a place for themselves, and the thing that he wanted for them was to have not only this kind of connecting element of their power, but also to have a nation, to have a home. He wanted Ravka to be their home. And I thought that that was just so profound, because, you know, you're seeing the way that Nikolai really loves Ravka and wants to make it a better place for everyone. But there's also the way that like the Darkling really did love Ravka and really wanted to make a safe place for the Grisha. Like there's that element of like making a safe place for them. And I thought that that was so sad, but also so true. And the way that he always felt alone in his power because of the way Baghra kind of taught him and raised him. And that was just so sad. And then especially like at the very end, when he realizes that Alina has lost her power, and he suddenly feels so alone. Like you see the hope and like everything just kind of dim in him, and he is just so lost because he's like, I'm literally alone. There's no one like me. And that was just so sad. And then I thought it was just so interesting seeing the way that, you know, in the end, like it was the way that the Darkling and like Baghra like underestimated the way that like regular humans, non-Grisha, were important as well. Like the Darkling is always saying how they can't understand the Grisha, and then in the end it's like those regular people who become like sun summoners who destroy the fold. And it is also like Alina who is reduced to being a regular human in Okazatsuya and taking a, you know, dagger and driving it into him, and that's what ends him. Also there's the aspect of whenever people tell me that they like the Darkling and that her and the Darkling should have ended up together, I'm going to point them to the scene where she visits him in his mind, where he takes her to the orphanage where he destroyed it and burned it, and then he takes her to the tree where he hung up Botkin and the person who looked after them all in the orphanage, Anakuya, and other like Grisha. He hung them up in a tree. He murdered them and then hung them up in a tree, and then brought her there to look at it, to see the carnage and see all her loved ones brought down and destroyed. And like how more twisted can that get? So yes, the Darkling is totally twisted and horrible, but like, it was just so interesting to see him go through all these struggles. The last thing I want to talk about is like the epilogue, seeing Alina lose the power and seeing her sadness over losing the power, and seeing her kind of like put her hands in the sunlight and knowing that it's lost, and also knowing how Mal feels that loss too, knowing that he has lost that kind of connection with all these creatures around was just very sad as well. And then of course seeing Nikolai's kind of grappling with having been this monster and then coming back and having these scars on him. And then there's this part of the epilogue where they say that he comes to visit them and he always wears gloves. And I thought that was so sad, and I'm really interested to see how that's going to come into play in King of Scars, and also how Zoya is going to come into play. And there's a lot of jokes throughout the book where Zoya's like, oh, I would definitely marry him and like be with him, and how could you choose Mal over like Nikolai to Alina? And it's just so funny. And so I'm really excited to see if that is a thing in King of Scars. But anyways, thank you so much for watching. My battery is dying, so I'm just gonna make this really quick. Thank you so much for watching this video. I really love the series, and I seriously cannot wait for this series to be adapted into the Netflix adaptation. Like, I know a lot of people are excited for Six of Crows, but like I really do want to see the Shadow and Bone trilogy as well. I think it's going to be absolutely amazing with all of the sun and darkness and all the amazing scenes in this series. So I just cannot wait. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, please remember that this story ain't over. Bye.